Colleagues, I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 12 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule selon...
Today's meeting will be in hybrid mode. Members will be participating in person and via Zoom.
And the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September the 23rd, 2025. The committee is meeting to study the detention of Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong. I would like to welcome our witnesses. Sebastian Lai, son of Jimmy Lai and leader of the Free Jimmy Lai campaign, by video conference. We may be joined soon by Kaylin Gallagher, lead international counsel to Jimmy Lai, by video conference. From the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, Brandon Silver, Director of Policy and Projects. We also probably will be joined soon by Mr. Michael Kovrig, Executive Director of Strategic Effects. And from the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation, Jonathan Stivers, US and Canada Director. Welcome. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions from members. I now invite Mr. Sebastian Lai to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Please proceed.
First of all, thank you so much for having me and for covering my father's case in such an important committee. I would like to first thank both the...
Can you speak louder, please?
No. Yes, sorry. Yeah. Hello. I would like to...
A brief moment, please.
Yeah.
Can you speak just a few words so we hear the sounds going out?
Can you attempt to speak a few words to test out the...
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me.
Again?
Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Okay, you can proceed.
You can proceed, sir.
Thank you. So again, thank you very much for having me and for covering my father's story and struggle. I would like to first thank Canada for recently joining the call for my father's release. Obviously, both the Parliament and the Senate have had unanimous consent motion passed calling for my father's release. So I would like to give a bit of an update since these calls were done. So my father's trial is nearing its end. He has spent almost 5 years in prison at this point in solitary confinement, with natural light blocked off from his room in a cell that is obviously not air conditioned. So in the summer goes up to 30, 40 degrees Celsius. He is 78 soon, and as you can imagine, with diabetes, we're incredibly worried about his life. In fact, recently he couldn't go to a trial because he had to be hooked up to a heart monitor because he was having heart issues. Throughout the trial, I think we are all we've all been very, I guess, strengthened to learn that there's no evidence. Essentially, the evidence that the prosecution has presented has been incredibly thin, and in fact, they have painted inadvertently my father as this man who, gave everything that he has to stand up for freedom and democracy, who through 20, 30 years of campaigning of journalism has shone a light on dark corners of Hong Kong. And when push came to shove, in 2020, after the passing of the National Security Law, decided to stay and defend his journalists. They have painted a man who advocated for democracy, but peacefully. In fact, whenever he met with students, were to tell them to not be violent. So he's always advocated for peace over all these years, and they have found this man who advocated for democracy under the Joint Declaration, so never advocated for independence. Incredibly moderate in a sense, but incredibly strong in his dedication to advocating for freedom and democracy. So in this case now, after 5 years, I see, I mean, I think we have gotten to a situation where it's in everybody's best interest that he is freed. Now, obviously, that is the opinion of both the Canadian government, the US government, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Italian government, Australian government. It is also the opinion of the United Nations. This is such a clear-cut black and white case where his rights have been violated. He is being essentially tortured at this point for his courage, and unfortunately, because of his deteriorating health, it is now incredibly urgent. So I asked again that all of you here who have been so incredibly supportive, keep shining a light on my father's story and keep your support going, because I think it is very much needed in this quite dark time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. I now invite Mr. Silver to make his opening remarks.
Honorable député, merci de me donner l'occasion de m'adresser.
Honorable members, thanks for this opportunity to address the committee.
Warm regards to all of you who would have been here testifying today if not for being in dialysis in the hospital, but he's tuning in online and following closely, and expresses his appreciation for your leadership in highlighting this case and in Parliament speaking out for the release of Mr. Lai. Indeed, as we meet today, human rights hero Jimmy Lai is languishing in torturous prison conditions in Hong Kong at 77 years of age, suffering from diabetes. He has been in prison for 1,772 days. His crime? Supporting journalism. As a British citizen with a twin sister and nieces and nephews in Canada, Mr. Lai could have easily fled, but instead he stayed to lead the struggle for democracy, for human rights, for the rule of law, for media freedom in Hong Kong, and to be a lightning rod to protect all those who were fighting for the same, campaigning for freedom. In so doing, he has become perhaps the most prominent and emblematic of political prisoner cases in the world, exemplifying this struggle for our shared values. As Canada embarks on a strategic dialogue and reset with China, we must ensure that these fundamental norms, these shared values that Jimmy Lai has put not only his livelihood, but his very life on the line to defend, finds expression in our conversations with China. The foundational principles of Canadian democracy and of this very Parliament should be asserted in these conversations. Parliament should press for Jimmy Lai's release publicly, prominently, and persistently until we see him free. Indeed, Parliament adopted a unanimous consent motion calling for his release in December 2023. And in February 2024, the Subcommittee of International Human Rights held a dedicated hearing on the case, and a month thereafter, in March 2024, itself published a release calling for Jimmy Lai's release and urging the Canadian government to exercise all deliberate efforts with all deliberate speed to help secure his release. Next week is the perfect opportunity for Canada to do so. As chair of the G7, our last major initiative is hosting a G7 foreign ministers meeting in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Mr. Lai helped develop this region, employs over 1,500 Canadians there. It is where his family resides. His sister and niece and nephews are all in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It would be particularly appropriate for the G7 foreign ministers to use this occasion to speak out on his behalf. Each of these governments have already been on the record individually, and now is an opportunity to do so collectively, which Canada can spearhead as chair. It would be an urgent and life-saving action. As we await the verdict in Mr. Lai's case, it is a particularly propitious moment to plead for his urgent humanitarian release. And it is also crucial for Canada's interests. Part of the charges against Mr. Lai is for engaging with all of you as Canadian parliamentarians. His case represents the criminalization of engaging with Parliament. Those were part of the charges against him. Canada is also a founding member of the United Nations. in China's response to UN Special Rapporteur interventions, asking if engaging with the UN is a criminal act under the national security law. Paragraph 54 of China's response said, depends on the context. So engaging with Canadian parliamentarians is criminalized under the national security law. Engaging with the United Nations is criminalized under the national security law. And Mr. Lai's case is emblematic not only of the struggle for rule of law, of democracy, of human rights in Hong Kong, but of the transnational threats that the national security law, being overbroad, draconian, and extraterritorial, represents. And that is an acute risk for the 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong and the over 500,000 Canadians of Hong Kong origin in Canada. And after the sense of impunity surrounding the persecution and prosecution of Mr. Lai, bounties were issued against Canadians on Canadian soil, which demonstrates the risks of silence in the face of these human rights violations. So other Kafkaesque allegations against Mr. Lai have included, as a newspaper owner, discussing the news with his journalists, discussing politics with politicians, and discussing human rights with human rights organizations. So it is particularly evident that while Mr. Lai's freedom depends on us, our freedoms depend on what we do for Mr. Lai. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. We will go next to Mr. Stivers. You have up to 5 minutes.
Chair and honorable members of the committee, bonjour and merci for the opportunity to testify today.
Good morning.
My name is Jonathan Stivers. I'm the U.S. and Canada Director at the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong, CFHK Foundation. My organization is dedicated to defending freedom and human rights in Hong Kong, and we work to strengthen the international response to intensifying repression there. My background is in U.S.-China policy. I've served at high levels in the U.S. Congress and the administration, including as the Democratic Staff Director at the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, and before that as a Senate-confirmed appointee for President Obama, and 15 years as a senior advisor for Speaker Nancy Pelosi working on China issues. In the U.S., the cause of freedom in Hong Kong and Jimmy Lai is bipartisan. And it's been strongly bipartisan over the years, and it's gratifying to see Canada is displaying the same example on such an important topic. In the 5 years since the imposition of the draconian national security law, Hong Kong has experienced a dramatic transformation from one of Asia's most open societies to a city where free expression is criminalized, civil society has been dismantled, and pro-democracy leaders, journalists, students face harassment and persecution. Since 2019, nearly 2,000 political prisoners have been detained, and many of whom remain imprisoned under conditions that violate international human rights standards. The prosecution of pro-democracy figures, including Jimmy Lai and Joshua Wong, illustrate the systematic weaponization of the judicial system as a tool for political control. So instead of restoring freedom and releasing political prisoners, Hong Kong officials are conducting a global messaging campaign to mask the deepening repression that has driven businesses and professionals and capital away from Hong Kong to other destinations. But simply put, if you have political prisoners, you cannot also be a trusted global financial center. And while the topic of this hearing is the case of Jimmy Lai, the issue of which he is a victim is China's control and the systematic repression of the Hong Kong people, and that has serious implications for the international community, and in particular the Canadian government. There is growing awareness and concern that Hong Kong has now emerged as the global hub for sanctions evasion and export control violations, supporting Russia, supporting Iran, and supporting North Korea. Last week, the CFHK Foundation, along with the Wallenberg Center, published this groundbreaking new report entitled Backdoor to the Battlefield: How Hong Kong Funnels Canadian Technology and into Russia's War Machine. Authored by my colleague Samuel Bickett, the report details how Canada's world-class electronics and aerospace sectors are being exploited to support Russia's war machine through a sprawling network of Hong Kong-based shell companies. The report draws upon battlefield forensics, Hong Kong public records, and Russian customs data to show where Canadian parts surface, who moves them, and why Canada's sanctions and enforcement architecture has failed to keep up. We provide evidence in this report that Canadian technology has repeatedly surfaced in Russian weapons recovered on the Ukrainian battlefield, with supply chains running through Hong Kong. In response to our report, Foreign Minister Anita Anand said that the government is examining these findings. She warned Canadian companies that those evading federal sanctions would be punished. We appreciate that response, and there's no doubt that Canadian companies need to better track their shipments. But I want to underscore that stronger enforcement actions from the government are essential. We know that neither Americans nor Canadians want to unknowingly be complicit with Russia's war in Ukraine, and we offer the following policy recommendations. First, partner with the US and the UK to exert calibrated and sustained diplomatic pressure to secure the release of Jimmy Lai and other Hong Kong political prisoners. Coordinated action among allies multiplies diplomatic weight and mitigates retaliation, while also reducing the risk that measures will be dismissed or sidelined by the Chinese government. Second, impose targeted Magnitsky sanctions on officials involved in human rights abuses in Hong Kong. To date, the U.S. has imposed targeted sanctions on 48 Chinese and Hong Kong officials. It is long past time for the Canadian government to exercise its own unique moral authority and hold Hong Kong officials accountable. Third, close the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office to HKETO in Toronto. The one country, two systems framework has ended. The Hong Kong government no longer deserves its own de facto embassy in Canada. The HKETOs are working hard to promote Beijing's narratives and propaganda, counter-lobby against human rights legislation, and court government officials as well as business leaders and others. In addition, the Hong Kong government has taken the brazen and unprecedented step of issuing cash bounties on activists in Canada. Foreign governments, much less city governments, should not be allowed to take such actions in the US or Canada without consequences, or at minimum losing their privileges. And last, designate Hong Kong as a high-risk jurisdiction for money laundering, impose secondary sanctions on Hong Kong companies and individuals who are providing support for Russia's war in Ukraine. Canada has long stood as a principled defender of human rights and democracy and has shown extraordinary solidarity with Hong Kongers seeking safety and freedom, and that legacy should continue, and it's something that I think Canada should be very proud of, and the United States, frankly, has to do better on. But through these recommendations, Canada can send a clear message that repression will not be met with silence. Thank you for your attention and your commitment to human rights. I look forward to your questions and further discussion.
Thank you very much. I want to welcome Mr. Michael Kovrig to the committee and give you an opportunity to make opening remarks for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be able to appear before this committee, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity. Today, like the past 1,913 days, Jimmy Lai is confined alone in a prison cell in Hong Kong. I understand what that's like. The confinement itself is raw suffering. The isolation and the loneliness grind on you mind, body, and soul. Jimmy Lai is taking all of that suffering to defend the freedoms of speech and freedom of the press that Canadians hold so dear. As Solzhenitsyn said, to stand up for truth is nothing. For truth, you must sit in jail. Well, for truth, Jimmy has sat in jail for long enough. Frankly, one day would have been too long given his innocence. His unjust ordeal should never have happened in the first place, and we should do all we can to bring it to an end. Following his meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney, General Secretary Xi Jinping stated that the two countries should uphold international fairness and justice. Let's call upon President Xi to honor his own words and free Jimmy Lai from unfair and unjust incarceration. Let me offer a few specific ideas. First, the advocacy and pressure needs to be massive, repetitive, intense, and persistent to be effective. Flood the system. Integrate Jimmy Lai's detention into all aspects of relations with China if you want him to be free. Call for his release through both bilateral and multilateral meetings. Every contact a parliamentarian has with a representative of governments of China or Hong Kong or the Chinese Communist Party or with influential business leaders is an opportunity. Do parliamentarians have constituents with connections in Hong Kong and China? Senior business executives in your ridings, perhaps, who deal with China on a regular basis. Offer them letters from you about Jimmy and a set of talking points to use. Ask them to deliver those letters to any Chinese government representatives they meet. Look for any contact points into that system, from the top right down to the working level. Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada and the Canada Border Services Agency may perhaps have some underused access to Beijing and Hong Kong officials and politicians. When those officials apply for visas or need to clear customs to enter Canada, is that not perhaps an opportunity to also give them a letter that urges them to release Jimmy Lai? Second, offer incentives and impose costs. For the Communist Party and Hong Kong government that reports to it, releasing Mr. Lai looks like a politically risky move. We need to think like politicians, frankly, making those decisions, but in their context with strategic empathy. As long as it costs nothing to keep Jimmy Lai in prison, and it could be costly for them or risky to release him, they're not going to free him. We have to flip that cost-benefit analysis. Perhaps make a list of everything the CCP wants from Canada and our allies and partners, and think about ways to condition progress on things they want on matters like ending Jimmy Lai's imprisonment and the imprisonment of other dissidents and detainees in both Hong Kong and the mainland. Create new quid pro quos. Perhaps sanctions or restrictions on certain officials or Chinese prisoners held abroad could be tightened, or alternatively, as a positive incentive, relaxed in exchange for clemency for Mr. Lai, for example. Chinese officials want us to have what they consider a correct perception of China. Well, Jimmy Lai's imprisonment darkens those perceptions. They are currently on a charm offensive in which they want to persuade the world that China is a responsible pillar of a multipolar order that wants to work with the government of Canada. Well, make clear that their diplomacy would be much more charming and their reputations would be burnished if they released Jimmy Lai and other detainees like him. Make clear that it would be easier to justify new trade and investment deals with China if Chinese counterparts demonstrated more benevolence, magnanimity, and reasonableness. And third, a few specific points of pressure, angles of advocacy, and incremental steps. The Chinese Communist Party is ruthlessly transactional. They will be asking what can be offered in exchange. Perhaps a Chinese prisoner currently held in a Western country. Hong Kong depends on trade and conferences. Boycotts can hurt. Encouraging more of them, on the contrary, can be an inducement for more favorable behavior. And Jimmy's health is failing. The CCP likely doesn't want him dying in custody. That would be a political embarrassment, potentially. For an elderly prisoner with medical concerns, a compassionate release on health grounds is an entirely plausible justification for release. This could be done in a face-saving, low-risk way. It could also be a pretext for incremental improvement, more communication with family and friends for prisoners like Jimmy, better access to books, a move to better conditions of detention, and then perhaps house arrest. It doesn't have to be all in one at once, right? Perhaps Jimmy's Catholic faith could also be the basis for rallying religious organizations and congregations. From Latin America to the Pacific Islands to the Vatican, countries with significant numbers of Christians could also be enlisted to the cause, as are others who can have sympathy with a figure like Jimmy. For collective leverage, it will also, as my colleagues have said, be essential to work in tandem with the United Kingdom, the United States, and the European Union as force multipliers, and also with as many other like-minded countries as possible. Do whatever you can to persuade President Donald Trump and other influential leaders to champion Jimmy's freedom and persistently fight for it. Above all, the party fears appearing weak. We need to convince them that a truly confident, legitimate government has no need to fear critics or lock up dissidents. So work to persuade Beijing and Hong Kong that keeping Jimmy Lai in jail is not a sign of strength. It's an embarrassing admission of weakness. Freeing Jimmy would actually be a gesture of power and magnanimity. So in closing, by identifying pressure points and combining relentless advocacy, incentives, and costs, it may finally be possible to change Hong Kong's calculus and finally free Jimmy Lai.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Colleagues, I have to suspend for a minute or two so that the team can test the connection of our last witness who hasn't spoken yet, Kaylin Gallagher from Lead International Counsel to Jimmy Lai, who's appearing by video conference. colleagues, we'll resume our meeting. And now we will hear from Kaylin Gallagher, Lead International Counsel for Jimmy Lai, who's joining us by video conference. You have up to 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, and my apologies to the committee for the technical issues. I've been trying to get in for the last 40 minutes, and my apologies for the disruption to everyone. It does mean that I haven't heard the opening remarks from others, I'm afraid. So may I also just apologize for any duplication in the circumstances. And if there are any issues which I don't cover, I'm of course very happy to cover them in writing. My name is Keelan Gallagher, KC. I'm International Counsel for Jimmy Lai. It's a privilege to act for Mr. Lai, along with our Canadian counsel, Erwin Kotler and Brandon Silver, and of course to act for Sebastian Lai, his brave son, who you're hearing from today. Many thanks to the Standing Committee for inviting me to give testimony, and my apologies for the technical difficulties which have bedeviled the start of this. I assume that my colleagues have already told you how Mr. Lai is a journalist, publisher, businessman, and a prisoner of conscience, and how, for his public interest journalism, his defense of press freedom and democratic values, and his courage in speaking truth to power, Jimmy Lai has now been imprisoned in solitary confinement in Hong Kong for almost half a decade, since December 2020. He's faced a barrage of spurious prosecutions. He's been subjected to a long, protracted, unfair trial on charges of sedition and alleged violation of the draconian national security law, and his case is emblematic of the crackdown on human rights, media freedom, and democracy in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, of course, was until relatively recently a beacon in the region, a bastion of the free press, a place with a flourishing civil society, adherence to international standards, the rule of law was intact, and businesses and foreign investment benefited from that stable and certain environment. But Hong Kong's descent into a very different place has been speedy and precipitous. It has plummeted down the press freedom rankings, tumbling from 18th in the world 2 decades ago to now languishing at the very bottom of the international league tables at around 140 out of 180, nestled with Kazakhstan and Rwanda, beaten by places like Guatemala and Congo. And that's not only bad for press freedom and human rights, it's bad for business, and it threatens the city's status as a global financial center. And I say that right at the outset, because it is clear that that is one of the key places where there is real leverage going forward in terms of securing Jimmy Lai's release and indeed saving his life. And I was privileged to catch the end of what Michael Kovrig was saying, and I appreciate that he was touching on very similar points. Now, Mr. Lai, of course, over the years has trod on very powerful toes, and the authorities have long hated him for it. He was targeted in multiple ways, and it's only in the last 5 years that the most powerful weapon of all has been used against him, and that's the law. And during that time, Apple Daily itself was forced to close following the freezing of its assets under the NSL. The printing presses have long since stopped. It's important to make clear that that was state-sponsored theft of a very successful business. And he has since that time faced a barrage of spurious prosecutions. But at the moment, the key case that we're focused on is the National Security Law and Sedition trial, which is limping to a close. Since he was arrested under the National Security Law in August 2020, he's served 4 sentences of imprisonment already, currently serving a 5th, and he has been the victim of what one of my other clients, Maria Ressa, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, would call lawfare. And critically, it's not just us as the witnesses today who you need to believe when we talk about his detention being unlawful and wrong. That is also the view of the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which found last year that the actions against Mr. Lai are intended to prevent him from exercising his right to freedom of expression and are deliberately designed to try to silence him. And the working group, in a very robust finding, found that he shouldn't have spent a single day in prison, that he's faced multiple violations of his fair trial and due process rights, such as to render his imprisonment on all previous cases arbitrary. And their very firm view that he should not have spent a single day in custody, let alone half a decade, is a very, very strong ruling. I've worked in this field for about 25 years, and it's a particularly robust, strong ruling from the UN Working Group. And that is why we now have multiple states around the world. I'm grateful to see Canada joining their number, calling for Jimmy Lai to be immediately released. Just very recently, we had Italy joining that international call, along with Canada, Australia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. 24 countries have condemned the process that he has gone through. And of course, many others have called for his immediate and unconditional release, including 5 UN special rapporteurs, Roman Catholic leaders, and civil society groups, including some of those represented today. Now, his trial under the NSL and for sedition is limping to a close, as I said, and that in essence is a trial for conspiracy to commit journalism and conspiracy to raise human rights issues in rooms like this and with people like you, with parliamentarians around the world. And if convicted, Mr. Lai faces life imprisonment, which in reality, given his age, means a death sentence. And of course, given the near 100% conviction rate under the NSL, Mr. Lai's profile, and the wording, which we hear repeatedly from Chinese embassies around the world when Sebastian speaks out, we expect the worst. But most urgently of all, in these opening remarks, I wanted to highlight the humanitarian issues, because time is running out. And I'm particularly concerned that given the delay tactics that we've seen in the NSL trial so far, we may see more foot dragging and further delay until the conviction and sentence. So it's imperative that we act now. And I'm having this conversation with you just days before foreign ministers meet in the Niagara area for the G7, and just weeks before the G20, both of which are real opportunities to land a key message with the Chinese authorities, that actually it's in China's interests to now release this man before he dies in prison. It's not only the right thing to do as a matter of principle, it's also the right thing to do from a pragmatic perspective for China. So in relation to the humanitarian issues, just very briefly, I wanted to just introduce the committee to some research which our team, the international legal team, has recently undertaken. And it's formed the basis for a new appeal that we filed with the United Nations. Now, that new research involved us going through every single publicly available detail on prisoners who have died whilst in custody or immediately after their release from custody or their transfer to hospital. And I'm afraid that what we found in that research, which looked back at 14 years of statistics, was deeply troubling. So we reviewed the deaths of prisoners in Hong Kong, in fact, for 11 years, from the period 2014 to 2025. They're deeply disturbing because they indicate that a significant number of deaths of older prisoners and diabetic prisoners have occurred in circumstances where it's apparent there was a failure to identify the person's deteriorating health condition in prison and a failure to transfer them to hospital in time for life-saving treatment. So during that period, what we found was that the vast majority of prisoners who died of apparent natural causes linked to their diabetes or their age were transferred to hospital fewer than 3 days before their death, within the last 72 hours of their life. And it's particularly chilling to note that 12 prisoners who died during that period very closely matched Jimmy Lai's profile, older male diabetic prisoners. The most recent death of the diabetic prisoner was just on the 28th of June 2025 of a man aged 74. And that could just very easily have been Jimmy Lai. Yeah. So this is exceptionally urgent. And we ask you to do all you can to support Jimmy Lai.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks. We will now open the floor for questions from members, beginning with MP Kramp-Naiman. You have 6 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for all the witnesses that are here this afternoon. The experiences of the witnesses here, their families, they're absolutely horrific and raw, and unfortunately not unique. I think it's critically important to start off by suggesting that we differentiate between the government of China and the nation and its people. The Chinese government has shown time and time again that they do not respect or care about Canadian nationals if they believe their interests are not aligned with their own, regardless of how trivial that misalignment may be. So my first question, do any of you believe we should be normalizing relations with the regime in Beijing before securing human right guarantees from their government? Or is this even possible?
Sure, I can take a shot at that. Let's see, I know Canada has just announced a new strategic partnership with China, which is not that not that dissimilar to what the United States is doing also. I don't know exactly what the parameters of this would be. Certainly engagement and discussion between the Canada and the Chinese government is absolutely essential. I think the key factor is you don't want the Canadian government or the U.S. government, you don't want to give away anything unless you're getting something in return. And I think that Michael explained that very well in his testimony. It's very transactional. And I think that the question is, how much do you elevate human rights issues? And what is the commitment for the Western countries, the UK, United States, Canada? How high is Jimmy Lai? How high are human rights issues in the list of things that are important? And I think we would all argue that this should be higher on the list, and that the people of Canada and the people of the United States and the people of the United Kingdom would all say this is a very high on their list of priorities.
Perfect, thank you. So with everything going on in the world right now, Canadians, we're in a tough spot, including policymakers sitting around this very table, I think can be ambivalent or forgetful about the very real threat that Beijing poses to our democratic institutions. Can any of you speak to the importance of remaining vigilant about the existential threat non-aligned states like China poses to Canada? And further, with your remarks about the strategic partnership that the government is speaking about, could this potential diplomatic and economic appeasement hurt Canada in the long run?
Let me speak briefly first to actually a point in your previous question on normalization. I don't think I would not choose to use that term because in the sense that you cannot normalize relationship with a government that does not behave normally, particularly in the sense of respecting norms in that international sense. So I would suggest rather that a framework should rather be an effort to stabilize relationships and recalibrate and reestablish channels of dialogue, and particular personal relationships and interactions at the most senior levels all the way through. That does not in any way constitute an endorsement of any policy, but rather simply a restoration of diplomacy with an effort particularly to ensure that those channels remain open on the Chinese side, so that whether for issues like the one we're discussing today or any other bilateral irritant or dispute or major crisis, there is a means to at least try to resolve them at the levels where the decision makers, the power holders in China, can actually get a hearing and one can articulate Canadian perspectives and concerns. To your second question, I think it is imperative that we take a long and more strategic view of the relationship with China in the broader geopolitical context. And be particularly mindful of the risks. And I think it's particularly important for politicians, for members of parliament, and for the government to ensure that Canadian citizens understand the potential costs and risks of any sort of deeper engagement. I understand perfectly well that for whether it's a corporate CEO or a politician, there is constant pressure to deliver immediate results and returns. But it's important to balance that with a long-term perspective on managing a relationship that isn't going to go away, but is going to be very complex, such that short-term transactional wins are not taken at the expense of longer-term consequences. And that's whether it's, for example, trying to deliver the removal of a bilateral irritant on trade or other economic options in terms of investment, for example. One needs to be looking at the longer-term national interest and the wider interest of Canadians and carefully weighing what the implications will be for national security and for the security of our population in doing so. But always going back to the basic framework that even if we may be trying to remove a particular irritant or problem or human rights case, for example, that we never forget that the fundamental problem is not somehow a lack of trust or lack of communication. It is that the Chinese Communist Party has a global agenda that is fundamentally adversarial and harmful in many respects, not all, but many respects, to the national interests of Canada and the interests of Canadians and those of most of our like-minded states and citizens of open societies. And we need to make every decision understanding that framework, not from the perspective of containing China or doing any harm to Chinese citizens or to the nation of China, but rather to protect ourselves from the either deliberately harmful actions or the negative externalities that are caused by China's own state security system or internal political economy dynamics. Our role is to protect ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go next to MP Van den Belde. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for very compelling testimony, all of you. And particularly, Mr. Silver, you used a term. You said that Jimmy Lai is a human rights hero. And I think we would all concur with that. And particularly to Sebastian Lai online, through you to your father, that I think we all call for his immediate release, but also the incredible courage standing up for media freedom and for human rights. And I would like to start my question with Ms. Gallagher, because I know that you've used a term, and it's an interesting term. You said, you've talked about lawfare, the weaponizing of the law to go after media freedom, human rights defenders, as something that's not just happening in Hong Kong, but something that is happening around the world, where those that oppose media freedom are actually learning from one another and, in fact, training one another how to do this. And you see it, for instance, in the Philippines with Maria Ressa, who was accused of tax evasion. In Hong Kong, of course, it's the national security law. There's fraud laws, defamation, where the actual laws and legal system of a country is being used to undermine the very rule of law that they are intended to uphold. So I'd like to start with Ms. Gallagher, but I can see that some of the others on the panel would like to weigh in as well. So Ms. Gallagher, go ahead.
Thank you so much for your question. It's exactly right. This is a real trend that we're now seeing. So I represent many publishers and journalists around the world who are targeted in a deliberate attempt to silence them and to stop them speaking truth to power. And increasingly what I'm seeing is the use of laws which are not just traditional legal weapons that are used against journalists, like, for example, defamation laws, but a much wider range of laws being deployed. And quite often what we see is deliberately trying to smear the journalist or the publisher. So Jimmy Lai, for example, being accused of being a fraudster in essence. Jose Ruben Zamora, the publisher of El Periodico in Guatemala, similarly being accused of money laundering. Maria Ressa, Nobel Peace Prize winner, accused of being a tax evader. So these are all tactics which we now see. And that's quite deliberate, because what it's designed to do is to undermine the messenger, to make the audience lose trust in the publisher, in the journalist, in their newspaper or in their broadcast organization. And as a result, it undermines the message. So that's a real tactic that we're seeing. I'm speaking to you just a couple of days after I spent some time with one of my other clients, Paul Caruana Galizia, whose mother, of course, was assassinated 8 years ago in Malta for being a journalist in October 2017. And at the time of her death, she was facing 48 different lawsuits. So like a legal whack-a-mole, where she was facing multiple different cases. And the Caruana Galizias are very clear that there is a direct link between what their mother experienced and the kind of tactics that we're seeing in Hong Kong against Jimmy Lai, this barrage of spurious lawsuits, having to fight a war on multiple legal fronts. But the most serious one of all, of course, is the NSL and sedition trial, which he faces now because of the very, very grave sentence which would potentially come from it, which we think is likely to come from it, which in reality would condemn this man to death.
And you mentioned all of these tactics in different countries. Is that a coincidence, or is there an actual deliberate attempt to share these practices, what works, what doesn't work, between countries that intend to undermine media freedom?
My view is that we see these pages being taken from the authoritarian playbook and being used in different countries. It's not coincidence. It's a deliberate strategy. I see tactics which have worked well, for example, in the sense that they have silenced journalists in Iran, or transnational repression methods used by Iran, then spreading and being used by China, for example. So what we see is that dictators and authoritarians are learning from each other. And they are getting very creative in the tools they use to try to silence journalists and publishers like Jimmy Lai. And we, need to get creative too and learn from each other, which is why I'm so grateful that you're having this hearing today and you're hearing from this very wide range of witnesses on this critical topic about this human rights hero.
And Canada has been leading on the Media Freedom Coalition, and this could be a forum where we could actually also mobilize globally to ensure that we're countering those tactics. Is there? I would just put it to Mr. Stivers first, if you want to add to any of those questions, and then to the others if there's time.
I mean, I can't say it any better than Ms. Gallagher, but it's not rule of law, it's rule by law. And it's authoritarians using law or so-called national security law, which has nothing to do with national security. I even don't like even calling it that. But it's rule by law being used to advance authoritarian priorities.
Brendan?
To your point about the Media Freedom Coalition, under Canada's leadership, both in 2023 and in 2024, the Media Freedom Coalition issued statements on the deteriorating press freedom situation in Hong Kong, and particularly urging the release of Mr. Lai, and expanding upon Keelan's very compelling and comprehensive interventions as to the authoritarian playbook on lawfare and attacking press freedom, and the need for a commensurate response from the community of democracies to uphold our shared values. There is no better moment to do so than next week via the G7. As a collective of rule of law nations that are fighting in common cause, there is a convergence, a rare convergence in this fractious diplomatic sphere globally, where the case of Jimmy Lai is a point of unity in this parliament across party lines and amongst our allies in the G7.
Thank you.
So we can use that opportunity to push back on these authoritarians.
Thank you very much. Député Duceppe, vous avez 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses. And thanks to the committee and the clerk for organizing this meeting in fairly short order. My question is for Ms. Gallagher. Happy to see you again. To what extent do you think that Mr. Lai's detention conditions and the legal proceedings are consistent with international law as it stands currently?
So thank you very much for your question, and my apologies that I'm answering in English rather than French. My view is, in line with the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture and in line with the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, that Jimmy Lai's conditions amount to inhuman and degrading treatment. That's my view. It is very clear that being in a circumstance of prolonged solitary confinement violates international law. Prolonged solitary confinement is solitary confinement for a period of more than 15 days. Jimmy Lai has spent almost 5 years in solitary confinement. Now, that in itself is a deep concern under international law, just the very fact of solitary confinement. When you combine it with the fact that he's elderly and he's diabetic, that hugely increases the risk of morbidity, I'm afraid. And that's why those statistics that I gave a little earlier are so worrying, because it's against a backdrop of many of those prisoners not having been in solitary confinement, but Jimmy Lai is. So this is a very clear violation of international law. That's the view of the expert international bodies. That's the view of the expert international lawyers. That's the view of multiple countries around the world. What we now need to do is to ensure that there is robust action rather than simply words calling for Jimmy Lai's release, because we do not want to end up in a position like we did with Liu Xiaobo in China, or like we did with Navalny in Russia. We need to get this man out of prison, back to Sebastian and back to his family before it's too late.
Merci, Madame Kovrig. On a parlé de normalisation.
Thank you, Ms. Kovrig. Ms. Gallagher, rather. Mr. Kovrig, we talked about a strategic approach to China. It can be viewed as an opportunity to get Mr. Lai's release, but others say that it's more of a negative thing to try to get closer to China, to Beijing. Which is your view? Thank you very much for the question. It's very complicated, but in my view, if we want to achieve our goals, whatever goal you might have with the government of China and Hong Kong, first of all, it's necessary to create conditions and relations that are decent between the leaders, between individuals, but also between institutions it's not the same as accepting China's positions, but it's at least opening channels to at least have some dialogue, some discussion, some negotiations to see what is possible. It's transactional, once again, when dealing with the Communist Party and the government of Hong Kong nowadays. In order to get Jimmy Lai released, it will be necessary to negotiate with the government of Hong Kong and the Communist Party to determine what they want in exchange for releasing that individual and to put a stop to this situation. So we should have, at minimum, some confidence, for example, between Prime Minister Carney and President Xi. There needs to be at least a minimum amount of confidence between them in order to resolve this situation. But it doesn't mean we have to accept their worldview, their perception of reality, or their moral stance. Thank you. Mr. Silver, some say that giving honorary citizenship to Mr. Lai would be a good thing and it would put more diplomatic pressure on Hong Kong authorities. Do you agree with that? Would that be a good idea? Thank you for that, for putting Mr. Lai's case, giving it a priority. So giving him honorary citizenship would be an expression of Canadian values, of the freedom of the individual, the freedom of press. Giving him citizenship could highlight this case and put it on the table, if you will, for diplomatic circles. It would show that Canada's Parliament is acting in solidarity with Mr. Lai by calling for his release, and we can act with his family who live right here in Canada. And it would recognize his contribution to Canada and the campaign that he has pursued to advance our values abroad. Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Gallagher. It was nice to see you. It'd be nice to see you in person sometime. Have you had any communication with your father, Mr. Lai? Thank you, Mr. Duceppe. Unfortunately, I've been advocating, I can't get back to Hong Kong. As you know, the national security law, which was enacted in 2020, it's a very wide-ranging and obscure or opaque, and it prevents me from accessing my father. So unfortunately, I haven't seen him in person. But my father is still fighting. He's almost 78. And as you heard before, he's ill, he's diabetic. And over the past 5 years, he's been in solitary confinement. And he's given his all for what he believes in. He's given everything he had. And so I know, even in a situation that's fairly hopeless, he's keeping strong.
Second round of questions with MP Rood. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for appearing here today. Beijing had promised Hong Kong the one country, two systems framework under which Hong Kong would continue its political, economic systems for 50 years until 2047. Under this framework, Hong Kong enjoys a high degree of autonomy and special privileges granted by many Western democratic countries, including Canada. The oppressive nature of the NSL and the trial of Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong signifies the city no longer enjoys this high degree of autonomy. Do you believe the Canadian government should reconsider the privileges currently extended to Hong Kong and its Economic and Trade Office in Toronto?
Thank you for that question. It's extremely important. We all know that the one country, two systems framework is gone. China doesn't even pretend very much that it still exists. They control Hong Kong completely. And the extent, the U.S. in 2020 revoked Hong Kong's autonomous status under U.S. law. I believe Canada has also. But yet these Hong Kong economic and trade offices continue. And make no mistake, they're not about economic and trade issues. This is a de facto embassy for the Hong Kong government to conduct diplomacy and reach out to the people of Canada and the United States. There's been, and in Europe, there have been cases. There's been espionage cases in the UK and Germany regarding actions that have emanated from those offices and their affiliates. There's no justification for them, and even worse, the fact that not the Chinese government hasn't put bounties on activists in Canada. The Hong Kong government has. How can a city government? How can we allow, from Canada to the United States, how can we allow a city government to take such brazen actions? It's unconscionable. In the U.S., there's 3 Hong Kong economic and trade offices, and Secretary Rubio, when he was a senator, he wrote the bill to shut down those offices. And so we're pushing very hard in the United States to close those down based on those issues, and Canada should do the same.
Thank you very much for that answer. I'm going to turn to Mr. Lai. Mr. Lai, what single action from Canada, public or private, would most help free your father now? And how should we coordinate it with the United States and United Kingdom for maximum pressure?
I think what Brendan said about putting it, as a top priority, especially in the G7 coming up, and just saying, look, if you want, we talk about normalization relationship. If we want to normalize relationships with China, if Canada wants a normalized relationship with China, well then this is a very easy thing for China to do to show good faith. I mean, logistically, this is putting a 70, soon to be 70-year-old man who spent 5 years in prison on an airplane, sending him back to his family. I mean, this is an incredibly simple thing to do, and if China can't even do this, when Canada has already called for their release, when so many countries have called for their release, when it's such a black and white case, then what can we possibly expect with a normalization relationship? So just putting it front and center and mentioning in all bilateral engagements between Canada and China, and saying that this is a case that matters. The values that this man stood for are values that are important to all Canadians. That we as Canadians would be proud to stand up for, and seeing, by imprisoning this man, you are imprisoning these values that we stand up for, and therefore we would hope that you would release him as soon as possible. I think that's how we get my father out.
Thank you very much for that. I'm just going to turn back to something that came up in the previous question. You mentioned the G7. We're all well aware of the threat of the Chinese communist-controlled police stations in Canada and media coverage on that topic. So how can Canada lead a G7 plan to protect diaspora communities from traditional repression such as these and the threats and harassment that they pose? And what assistance should victims be able to access quickly, both legally and practically?
Well, particularly when it concerns cases of arbitrary detention more generally, but especially in an emblematic case like that of Mr. Lai's, Canada is uniquely placed, particularly because of the statement from Parliament, the unanimous consent motion in December 2023, where Parliament unanimously said, quote, Jimmy Lai represents the very best of Canadian values, the pursuit of human rights, rule of law, media freedom, and he should be released immediately. And I think that gives Canada, especially now coupled with the Prime Minister's statement in that regard, the opportunity to lead our allies who have similarly been outspoken in raising it collectively, and thereby also not have the same fear of reprisals that have sometimes been referenced. We are coming as the group of the most powerful countries in the world with shared values, shared norms that Jimmy Lai is on the front lines of defending and can speak out on his behalf in that way.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll go to MP Oliphant. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to thank all the witnesses for their for your not only your witness here, but your witness in life and what you're doing for Jimmy Lai and others and your work. Mr. Kovrig, thank you for being here. And I get emotional every time I see you. It was a long 1,000 days. And despite our best efforts for those 1,000 days, and my job in Consular Affairs at the time was extremely difficult because we did not find a solution for over 1,000 days, and despite our best efforts. And so I'm thinking now, how do we do better? And your concept of strategic empathy, and that concept of not agreeing, but finding some common ground and finding what's in the imagination and the motives and the understanding of the other is something that I am trying to do personally in my life all the time, so we don't other people, but firmly disagree. We have differences of opinion. So I'm looking for a little bit of help, and I as usual, take my wisdom from Maya Angelou, who said, if you look ahead of you, you don't like what you see, and you look behind you, and you don't like what you see, then you better chart a new path. So I'm looking for a new path in what we do. I spent my life as an advocate in many ways. Advocacy public doesn't always work. We have the UK, we have the UN, we have our Prime Minister speaking to the President Xi. I'm looking for your ideas on what can we do to open a door that will get Jimmy Lai home.
Thank you. Obviously, if I had the solution quickly available to those questions, we would already be doing it. But to go beyond my initial remarks, I think in this geopolitical age of monsters, we need to think pragmatically, but not pragmatism in terms of some kind of short-term excuse to focus on, for example, economic gains, but rather in terms of leverage and strategy. What does the other side, and I don't mean to other them, but rather simply our counterparts, what do they want? What are their interests? Where are the points of leverage? Where are their pain points, frankly, but also what are the potential rewards? Like political figures or officials in any other system, they respond to incentives. How do we change their cost-benefit analysis on Jimmy Lai? And I think suasion and persuasion is one, a strategic narrative to articulate the fact that it's actually more costly for them to hold him. For Jimmy Lai to become ill in prison, for example, does them absolutely no benefit. And if anything, the risk of a problem from their self-interested perspective is going to grow the longer he is there. So why not find a face-saving way to end this? Do they really think from their perspective? Do they really want a martyr who is then becomes some kind of a symbol that is problematic for them? These are cold calculations, but ultimately one has to look at it from their utterly ruthless, realist perspective and think, how can we create leverage in negotiations? What does Canada have together, most especially with our allies and like-mindeds in the G7, in the CPTPP members, in the European Union? How can we collectively together come up with a common position that says, if you persist with this, we will impose these costs? Let me give you one example. The European Union had members of European Parliament sanctioned by China. Only when China wanted something and the European Union denied it to China did China take the step to removing the sanctions from those members of European Parliament. I think that's one example, right? And to some extent, it's a question of creating that leverage. So to go back to the earlier question, for example, about Hong Kong offices or transnational repression in Canada, right? We need to look at all the tools we have going across the dime fill to limit and constrain those offices from doing anything harmful in Canadian society, from assuring all Canadian citizens, regardless of their national origin or ethnicity, that they are safe in Canada, and our law enforcement services and our investigative services, our intelligence services will work together to protect them and assure them that there will be no transnational repression in Canada, and then from there look to extend that.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems to me to do that, you need to understand the other party and you need to talk to them. So that would be my opinion. Mr. Lai, looking at the screen, with my old consular hat on, I want to know how your father is doing and I want to know how your father's doing.
Unfortunately, a brief response, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, my father's health is very poor. Unfortunately, I can't go back because I advocate for him, and so all the information I get, all the communication I get, is because he has appeared in court. So in court, he's visibly gaunt, much skinnier. Obviously, the information about how he's being held is public. His diabetes is public, and the fact that he's having heart issues is also public. But look, I think it's a situation where obviously in the last 5 years, the attempt is to break him. I mean, it's to break this man. That's why they put him in solitary confinement. It's to tell you that nobody cares about you, that you've done all this for nothing. And so it's no wonder that his health has gotten so much worse. But to quote the poem in Invictus, his head is bloodied but unbowed, and so he's still fighting.
Thank you. Monsieur Duceppe, you have 2.5 minutes.
OK, rapidement, donc,
Okay, just quickly then, Ms. Gallagher, can you tell the committee when the judgment is expected in Mr. Lai's case?
Answer, we don't know. When pressed, the court said in good time. I would like to add something in due course, if I may, just on some of the previous questions, but I won't eat into your time.
No, allez-y.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to support what was said by Michael Kovrig so powerfully just now, because my view is, having done 25 years of political prisoner cases, including very, very difficult cases involving Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iran, and so on, my experience is that ultimately...
Madam Gallagher, your microphone is too low, so if you can just bring it up a little bit. Thank you.
I hope that works. My experience is that in every single case, what you need to work out is the hassle factor. So how it's more trouble for the detaining state to continue detaining the prisoner than to release them. And ultimately, that's what we know works with China. It's what worked ultimately in the case of the two Michaels. It's what worked in the case of Australian journalist Cheng Lai. It's what worked very recently in the US securing the release of Pastor David Lynn and then 3 further Americans last autumn. And it's what worked for Ireland, a minnow of a state internationally in many ways, but which secured the release of businessman Richard O'Halloran. In every single case, it was working out what the leverage was and then acting accordingly. And I very strongly agree with the example of the European Parliament, because a critical issue is sequencing and using language about a pragmatic reset and a turning point in relations and so on. Language which we've seen a number of states use in recent months before you've actually secured the right outcome in Jimmy Lai's case is the wrong way round, in my view. We know from Cheng Lai's case or the European Parliament that your sequencing should be conditionality. We'd like to have more engagement. We'd like to, for example, have a state visit, or you have what the prize is, but you make clear that they're not getting the prize unless and until they do the right thing in relation to securing the release of the prisoner or lifting the sanctions or whatever the issue may be. And here, the issue is securing the release of Jimmy Lai.
Thank you very much. We'll go to MP Rood, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Korvig, based on your experience, what are the warning signs of hostage diplomacy Canadians should watch for, and what specific policies would deter the Chinese Communist Party from detaining Canadians again?
How long do I have for that? I don't think there are necessarily specific warning signs. It varies from country to country. But briefly, there are particular states that engage in that behavior. But I think the way to look at hostage diplomacy is not as a consular issue exclusively or as simply that kind of hostage taking. It is one tool in a coercive kit that authoritarian states that are less respectful of norms and laws are willing to use. And they will use whatever tool in the kit they think is going to get what they want in a given case. To some extent, they like reciprocity. So one warning sign is if there is a case in a Western government country, as with Meng Wanzhou, for example, where there is a person being held, they are more likely to try to use hostage-taking rather than other tools of coercion. But let's remember, in the case that involved me, there were also trade sanctions and other forms of leverage used. So again, they are using asymmetric forms of leverage against democracies, and hostage-taking is one of them simply because they don't have any ethical barrier to be willing to do so. So the warning signs are that there is a dispute in which they would consider that tool an effective way to accomplish their ends. And deterring it needs to be done by demonstrating costs and consequences for engaging in that behavior. As long as they can get away with it and there is no cost imposed on them, they will continue to do so. There are two ways, essentially, to deter. Deterrence by denial, which we do by discouraging Canadian citizens from going to countries like Iran or North Korea, and deterrence through punishment and consequences. And unless they are imposed on the individuals perpetrating it and on the countries, they will continue doing it as long as costs are not imposed.
So that being said, what training and protocols should Global Affairs Canada adopt immediately for Canadians traveling or working in high-risk jurisdictions to reduce vulnerability to arbitrary arrest and exit bans?
Very briefly, I think some of those are already expressed in our travel warnings to those, but there is a lot that could be done to make those travel warnings more obvious and apparent to anyone proposing to travel to such a country. So the first is denial, right? If there is a risk and the government does not want to incur the burden of having to rescue someone from a country like that, the easiest thing to do, first of all, is to not allow the situation to happen in the first place. And so there are various ways to, even in a democratic, open society, to deter our own citizens from putting themselves at risk, and, for example, encouraging them or creating processes when you're buying plane tickets, let's say, right? You have to obliging you to register with the relevant embassy, but also obliging you to go through some kind of checklist and travel preparation forms, for example, that obliges you to consider the risks to yourself and whether you really understand what you're doing in going to a place like that, and going through a number of steps that would not only deter people from going to places where they're at risk, but also set up more protocols to ensure that if they are there, there are better means of trying to provide care and protection to them. Another crucial one, frankly, would be creating a legal framework in which the government has a legal obligation to actually provide that consular assistance rather than just a more generalized bureaucratic responsibility. There are many others, but for the sake of brevity, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stivers, what has worked best in Washington to counter Communist Party coercion, sanctions, export controls, visa bans, or coordinated statements, and how can Canada plug into those tools without hurting our own economy? And if Beijing ignores allied pressure on Jimmy Lai, what next step measures should Canada champion at multilateral associations to raise real repercussion costs without isolating our allies?
Well, thank you for that question. First, I would say the U.S. definitely needs to do a better job. I think it's important that there's consequences. The Chinese government is like any other government. They're always weighing consequences of their actions. And when they know there might be something negative that would occur because of an action, they take that into account. Appeasement is dangerous. Showing weakness is dangerous. And this is not some tough guy thing. This is how the Chinese Communist Party operates. And they take advantage when they see weakness. And when they know that there will be a strong response, which I would argue the United States has not taken strong enough responses, then they definitely calibrate their actions.
I think my time.
You still have 20 seconds.
I still have 20 seconds. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate those remarks, and thank you so much for being here today.
If we have a few
Sure.
seconds.
Sure.
And I would just say the biggest fear of the Chinese government is that there's a multilateral effort, that it's not just Canada, it's not just the United States, it's not just the UK. There's a multilateral response of all of these allies and partners saying the same thing and being on the same page. That is their worst fear diplomatically, and that takes a lot of work for our countries to get together, but they should do so.
Thank you very much. We'll go next to MP Bill Blair. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you very much to all of our witnesses. This has been, quite frankly, quite compelling and informative in all of your testimony. I've actually had some direct relations and engagement with Chinese government officials. And I find in many of those conversations, we demarche each other about all the things that are outrageous, but at the same time, it does not achieve effective outcome in many respects. And I've reflected on the number of times that is listed in our documents about the fact that we have made this point to the Chinese government, but without the outcome that we seek. And I think the advice that you're providing in all of your comments has been very, very helpful to this committee, and I wanted to acknowledge that. I also would like to ask some questions about our national security and the safety of our citizens and the implications of the extrajudicial application of, for example, the national security law and the activities that you've already mentioned, the Hong Kong trade offices that exist in some of our cities. In my experience, that can have a very chilling effect on Canadians, Chinese Canadians in particular, not only for their activities here in this country, but also in their very legitimate and understandable concerns for their families at home. And that chilling effect can take a number of different forms. But perhaps could you offer some advice on, because I think it's useful for our government to be able to say, not only are we standing up for a champion of human rights and journalism freedom, but we're also standing up for ourselves and we're standing up for our interests. So any advice, and I might start with you, Mr. Silver, on things that we should be doing in this country to protect our national security, our national interests against the threats that the extrajudicial application of those laws could represent to our people.
Thank you very much, Honourable MP Blair, for that very timely and important question. Because as I referenced in my opening remarks, the impunity or perceived impunity surrounding the persecution and prosecution of Mr. Lai emboldened the Chinese Communist Party and authorities in Hong Kong to engage in that transnational repression, to issue bounties targeting Canadians on Canadian soil. So mass domestic repression often morphs into external aggression. So mitigating that sense of impunity, ensuring justice and accountability, marshalling public opprobrium, diplomatic efforts in coordination with allies can create that tipping point that Keelan so eloquently and aptly described, where whether it's the Hong Kong authorities or the Chinese Communist Party that controls them, that they feel and understand that there are repercussions for these actions and that it is not worth the cost of pursuing them. And again, some of these put Canada in a particularly unique position to lead on. We are a founding member of the United Nations. We are a member of both the Commonwealth and of Francophonie. We are active in the OSCE. All of these forums provide platforms and opportunities to push back against this sort of transnational repression and to highlight the emblematic cases that could mitigate it, such as Mr. Lai's case. So again, I think publicly, prominently, and persistently raising these cases not only directly at a high level with the Chinese, but multilaterally with our allies in every forum possible and where Canada is uniquely placed to do so.
Please, sir.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. You know, I've negotiated with the Chinese government on a number of occasions on a lot of issues throughout Asia. And I will say that the first thing is you need strong leadership at the top of our countries in order to make change and have skilled diplomacy. The Chinese don't give in easily. There's no doubt about that. But I think there are ways to flip the script. One way, especially when we're talking about the case of Jimmy Lai, is to make expectations very clear. If there is a verdict that does not go well or there's a long sentence, then Canada will take these actions. And you make that clear to them before it happens. And then be ready, of course, to follow through with that. The HKTOs are a great example. The Canadian government can say they are under review now. If the Jimmy Lai case does not go well or he's not released, then we will start moving to close those down in response. And I think that's changing the dynamic there to being on an active defense as opposed to always responding later to the Chinese will increase the chances of a better outcome.
If I could just say briefly to address your question about national security, again, this is a changed world where if we want to have greater interaction and economic opportunities with challenging states such as China, it needs to move in lockstep with security measures to protect our society and our national security. And that means things like raising the capacity. Canada is already engaging in a China capacity uplift at the federal government and provincial government levels. It needs to be across society, including, for example, for local police, to raise their understanding and capability of addressing transnational repression and those issues. We need to educate communities and the entire population about the nature of these challenges and how to address them at a whole of society level. A specific measure that I think is critically important is a foreign agent registry, which I know that this government is working on. That is a critical measure to ensure that greater contact and interaction with Chinese actors does not become undue political interference or influence.
Thank you very much. We'll go next to MP Baldinelli. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us this afternoon. Sebastian, it is good to see you again. Your father is recognized as a global leader in advancing democracy and freedom of the press, and sadly for that, he is being jailed. What is not widely known amongst Canadians, however, is your father and your family have significant ties and connections to Canada, to Niagara, including in my riding of Niagara Falls and Niagara-on-the-Lake. In fact, Niagara-on-the-Lake is widely known as one of the prettiest towns in all of Canada, and a big reason for that prestigious reputation is because of the incredible and impactful investments your father has made in a number of our local hotels and accommodations through his companies such as Vintage Inns and Niagara's Finest. And those include like the Pillar and Post, Prince of Wales, Queen's Landing, the Moffat Inn, and Shaw Club, just to name a few. In total, there's 8 hotels in Niagara-on-the-Lake in total. So could you please share with us your family's story of coming to Canada and investing so much in our small town?
Yeah, like my father has always had incredible love for Canada. You know, as Brandon said before, and you so eloquently put it, you know, I have a lot of family in Niagara-on-the-Lake, including my father's sister, his nieces and nephew, their kids, and their grandkids. So I think one of the things that I realized in fighting for my father over the last 5 years is how incredibly, obviously, courageous his stance was, but also how he knew that it was a necessity. I mean, everybody knows that it's much more comfortable in Niagara-on-the-Lake than in the Hong Kong jail cell. That's no, you know, there's no argument there. But the fact that a man would choose to be away from his family, you know, despite the incredible warmth that gives you, especially in this late stage in his life, and to choose a cold Hong Kong jail cell, I think it talks to the courage of my father, but also the importance of the values that he stood for. And I like to think that, you know, hopefully he'll be out soon, and he'd be able to go back and see his sister again, and see his nieces and nephews and their kids and their grandkids. And so, yeah, you know, it's
we stand for as well. And I believe your father, the last time he did come to Niagara-on-the-Lake was about 2018. Next week, November 11th and 12th, the Government of Canada will be hosting the G7 ministers in Niagara. I believe in Niagara-on-the-Lake exactly. If you could ask them for help in freeing your father, what would you say? What is your message to those ministers and governments?
I think my father's story is the reminder that, you know, the best days are ahead, right? I mean, here's someone who's willing to sacrifice everything he has to stand up for the freedoms and democracies that we all love and share, and that we would all like to see more of. And in light of that, in light of these beliefs, I think it's incredibly important to tell Hong Kong and China that this is not in the best interest to have this person die. I mean, this is a person who has given everything that he has for these beliefs, and as democratic countries, he's almost a representation, a distillment of all these beliefs in a man who's sitting in prison in Hong Kong. So I would like for them to join in unison to call for my father's release and work for that to become reality.
Thank you. Mr. Silver, just the other day on Tuesday, the Minister of Foreign Affairs during question period was answering a question dealing with international trade, and she had this one sentence in her response. I jotted it down, and she mentioned, "We will continue to stand up for human rights around the world, especially within multilateral organizations." So, Mr. Silver, do you believe that the freeing of Jimmy Lai is on Canada's Minister of Foreign Affairs G7 agenda in Niagara next week?
We're particularly pleased that this case is a unifying one. As I cited in quoting the unanimous consent motion of December 2023, Parliament as a whole espoused that Jimmy Lai represents the very best of shared Canadian values. So I trust that based on this unanimous will of Parliament, that the government will seize any opportunity in front of it to save the life of a human rights champion who is suffering immensely as we speak today. And we've been encouraged that the Prime Minister recently spoke out and hope and trust that the government will use, as you suggested, any opportunity multilaterally, whether at the G7 or the UN, or even in this strategic dialogue with China. There is a consular dialogue as a part of it. Jimmy Lai's case should be a standing agenda item in the consular dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we go to MP Mona Fortier. You have 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, rather, and thanks to everyone here today. We share your opinions and your ideas. I'd like to begin with Mr. Lai. I stand with you with everything you're going through and your family, and I hope your father will be released, as we all hope for. Mr. Oliphant asked earlier whether you'd been able to have any contact with your father, but I'd be more interested in knowing if you could explain whether he's had any meetings with people from consular affairs. What kind of contacts has he had with other people? Mayor, thank you very much, member. My father's not having any consular access on the basis of him being ethnically Chinese. So the Chinese view him as Chinese, even though he has a British passport and a Canadian passport. He's seen as purely Chinese. He's got, despite his British passport, and so on that basis, he's been denied any consular access, and that's very unfair. And it's not true. And I think there are a lot of people in Canada who may have Chinese descent too, and we would be in the same boat. And so because he doesn't have Canadian citizenship, he hasn't been able to have consular access. That's right. And that's been the case for the past 30 years or so with his pro-democracy campaign. He's not even allowed to go to China. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's important to mention that because I now have the role that Mr. Oliphant had as responsible for consular affairs, and sadly, because of some countries where they don't recognize dual citizenship, we're denied consular access. I'd like to now ask Mr. Silver, I'd like you to talk about strategy. Perhaps you could share some examples of cases where you've been able to make progress on human rights dealing with this kind of situation. Is there anything you could share with us? Yes. Thank you very much, Parliamentary Secretary, for that question. Just going back to the previous question, it's even worse than that. It's not just that they don't recognize dual citizenship. Mr. Lai does not have dual citizenship. The only citizenship he has is British. And even though he only has one citizenship, the Chinese government will not recognize that citizenship and that consular right the right to consular access. Now, Canada is at the forefront. And just recently, in the case of Vladimir Karabosai, Canada was there, and this committee and this parliament passed a unanimous motion to grant honorary citizenship to that individual. So our diplomats, our embassies can play a role. They need to raise these issues at every single opportunity with Mr. Kara-Murza when dealing with the Russians. And every time they participate in any diplomatic platform, no matter what, they need to raise these cases. The case of Mr. Kara-Murza was emblematic in Russia, in the same way that Mr. Lai's case is symbolic for Hong Kong in terms of the fight for democracy and freedom of the press. So we can, based on the case of Mr. Kara-Murza, that was a long campaign. It was unrelenting, and it required high-level, mid-level, and low-level diplomatic efforts between ministers, and it involved, we had to get our allied countries on board too, and there was a request to be present in court. We need to be creative in our ways of engaging. And it ended in Mr. Kara-Murza's release after a long campaign by the Government of Canada. We need to do the same thing for Mr. Lai if we want to get the same result. Thank you very much.
5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Silver, we had invited Mr. Kotler today, but unfortunately he couldn't join us. I don't want to put any pressure on you, but what would he have had to say if he'd been here with you?
And I know that Professor Kotler, who's in a hospital bed now watching this, will appreciate that question. And apologies for answering in English, given that, I'm potentially saying for the sake of clarity, I'll respond in English. But, he's in dialysis now because of complications from diabetes. So I think he'd first respond by talking about the acute risks that Mr. Lai is facing as a senior citizen and diabetic sitting in a Hong Kong prison, and stress the urgency and humanitarian nature of this case. And I believe as a former parliamentarian, he would also thank you for your leadership unanimously and persistently in advancing this case, and urge that it be continued, and that the leadership that the government is exercising be deepened, that it be raised at the G7, that it be raised multilaterally, but that the role of law, as a former Minister of Justice who spent half a century before that, advocating for political prisoners around the world, that parliamentarians and the rule of law has a role to play, that the Minister of Justice of Canada can raise with Hong Kong legal authorities the case, that any creative mechanism that might exist should be exercised. And I think he'd probably share the story of his work representing Anatoly Sharansky, who was eventually released from the most powerful country in the world at the time, the Soviet Union. And similarly to what Keelan and Michael were sharing earlier, that only happened because of the tipping point that was reached. He saw the premier of the Soviet Union at a conference years later and asked him, why was Sharansky released from prison? What worked? What part of our advocacy made a difference? And the premier said, believe it or not, when I took office, I did not know who this political prisoner was, even though he was celebrated around the world. But every time I went to a bilateral meeting, every time I went to a parliament, everybody was raising this case. So when I went back to the Soviet Union, I called up his file, I looked it over, and I said, it's just not worth it. It's coming up everywhere, there's too much pressure. And that scale was balanced, and he decided to release him. And there were other important mechanisms in other cases that, again, like in the Soviet Union, that there was the Jackson-Vanik Agreement, where in another struggle that Professor Kotler helped lead, that we used our leverage, trade relations, diplomatic relations, to ensure that the human rights that were being violated were redressed, and that the necessary actions were taken. And I know that would not nearly do justice to anything Professor Kotler would have shared, but I know at least in principle these are some things he would have wanted to raise.
Excellent travail.
Thank you very much. We will next go to MP Conans. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you all for being here. You all are very powerful witnesses. My first question is to Mr. Silver. Which officials and entities tied to Hong Kong's national security law prosecutions meet the legal threshold for Canadian Magnitsky sanctions today? And how would we structure listings to be effective and defensible?
Well, speaking more generally about Canada's sanctions, laws, whether the Special Economic Measures Act, the Justice for Sergei Magnitsky Act, it's anchored in international law, in human rights protections, and the fact that, as Keelan referenced earlier, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, a number of UN Special Rapporteurs have cited the egregious violations of human rights law, of China's international legal obligations, that certainly in the cases presented here from a legal standpoint, the Canadian thresholds under our targeted sanctions laws would have been fulfilled based on the violations inherent in the national security law enforcements. And perhaps, Jonathan, I know the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong has made a number of sanctions submissions relating to Hong Kong authorities and might have more to share substantively beyond the legal dimensions.
I would just say it would be good to start with the 48 Chinese and Hong Kong officials that have been sanctioned by the United States under different administrations, both the Trump and Biden administration. We believe those definitely meet the threshold. There are others, but we think those definitely meet the Magnitsky threshold.
My next question would be to any of you who know the answer to this. Have any countries imposed sanctions specifically related to Jimmy Lai's detention or prosecution? I think I know the answer to that, but has there been any specific sanctions? And if not, why do you think that is?
I don't know that anyone has been sanctioned specifically for Jimmy Lai. It's been, I think the sanctions designations have been broader than just Jimmy Lai. It's been repression, it's lack of autonomy, it's political prisoners generally, it's transnational repression. Those are the reasons that are given as opposed to a particular political prisoner. But certainly the jailing of 2,000 political prisoners since 2019, many of whom are still in prison, has been the reason for sanctioning a number of almost all of the Hong Kong and Chinese officials.
If I may just make a comment about a sanctions-related issue that the Honourable Mona Fortier raised earlier, which is the issue of dual citizenship or the lack thereof with China. I think this is a critical issue because China does not, the government of China violates its own laws and principles in dealing with these cases. The nationality law of China explicitly states that if a Chinese citizen acquires a foreign citizenship, they automatically lose their Chinese citizenship. There are different provisions for Hong Kong citizens, but all the same. So to assert that a UK citizen, or for example, that any of the 4 Canadians that the PRC executed earlier this year are not Canadian citizens is absurd by China's own laws. And one way that we can make use of China's current charm offensive and desire to portray itself as a responsible upholder of multilateralism and global governance is to work with allied and like-minded countries to press on this critical consular issue of getting China to respect basic fundamental norms and laws of international relations and consular relations and diplomacy that a UK citizen or a Canadian citizen, Hussein Shalil, another example, is entitled to at least to consular visits and consular attention and protection, because that is crucial to the health and safety of detainees. And that can in turn be used as a further means of leverage and influence in a case such as Jimmy Lai's. And ultimately, progress on economic issues that China and Hong Kong want needs to be conditioned simply on compliance with international agreements that China has already accepted and agreed to. We are simply asking them to comply with their own laws and with the international treaties that they have signed. Thank you.
What would you say is the smartest way for Canada to update our business risk advisory on Hong Kong and mainland China so companies, universities, and investors avoid feeding surveillance, censorship, or forced labor supply chains?
Very, very brief response.
Briefly.
Well,
we commend Canada for having done that, and in connection with Mr. Lai's case and the weaponization of the national security law, Canada and a number of countries updated travel advisories, warning whether it's tourists or business people that the arbitrary, and I'm quoting here, the business advisory, that they should take notice of the arbitrary application of local laws that pose high risk. And that gives us leverage. We can use those advisories and show the Hong Kong authorities that if they were to release these prisoners, that would encourage the trade, the investment, the tourism that has rapidly declined as a result of their persecution and prosecution of peaceful advocates like Mr. Lai.
Thank you very much. Next, finally, we have Anita, MP Anita van der Velde. 5 minutes.
I appreciate so much the testimony that we've gotten today. I think there's a lot that we can follow up on. I particularly would like to direct my question to Sebastian Lai. Your persistence, dedication to fight for your father is truly, truly admirable. And I just wanted to ask you why you think that your father was such a threat. We've heard in previous testimony in the Subcommittee on International Human Rights that it's not about the individual. It's about trying to destroy the entire media ecosystem. And I have to wonder that, when going after your father, there's a much bigger motivation behind that. If you could perhaps reflect on that.
Sure. Thank you very much. I think my father was, in what he did was the belief of many Hong Kong people, right? That these freedoms are what makes the place special. It's because we have the rule of law, the free speech, free press, and all these things are sort of distilled within my father, within his journey. That's what made Hong Kong special, and that's what Hong Kong wanted more of. He always had this sort of tongue-in-cheek phrase where he said, "Hong Kong is so poor that all they have is money," which I found quite sweet and quite apt. But I think, in some sense, the Hong Kong government has made a tremendous misstep. They arrested my father thinking that he, as they put it, was this black hand behind the protests, this quote unquote foreign agent, right? I mean, their idea was that why would someone sacrifice everything that he has in order to stand up for freedom and liberty? Why wouldn't he just run away? So there must be something. And after 5 years of having him there, after going through all this stuff, after torturing one of the witnesses to give testimony, they have found that to be totally untrue. That he did all of this because he knew that it was the right thing, as do many of you know that this is the right thing. And that he never advocated for any extreme views and was always a man of peace. And so now in their hand, they have this prison of conscience, this human rights hero, as many people here put in, and many people around the world agree. And I think they're in a situation where, frankly, they don't really know what to do with it. And that's why it's so important to push them to release my father, to tell them that, look, this is someone that we want. And if he dies there, well, there's going to be very real consequences.
I certainly hope, and I think everyone on this committee hopes that doesn't happen. And just the testimony we've heard today makes very evident that he was standing up for real values and is continuing to. I wanted to ask Ms. Gallagher one more question, because we know that it's not just a targeting of individuals, but also everybody around them, their support, including their lawyers. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the threats that are happening to you and to the legal team, and what maybe we could also do to help in that.
Well, these are two tactics which go hand in hand. The first question that you asked, Sebastian, about the media ecosystem ties in to this concentric circles approach, where as well as targeting Jimmy Lai, who's at the epicenter of their campaign, they target everyone associated with him. And that's part and parcel of what they're trying to do. So what I'm increasingly seeing in my work is the targeting of publishers in order to shut down a newspaper. And in essence, by going after Jimmy Lai, the biggest fish of all, by shutting down Apple Daily, by having this very high-profile trial where more than 160 articles from Apple Daily, opinion pieces and videos are labeled as criminal, that sends a very, very clear message. And put frankly, if they can get Jimmy Lai, the biggest fish of all, in media terms in Hong Kong in prison, it sends such a message to the small fry. It makes very clear to everyone else that if they dare to speak out, they may be next. And that's the same kind of tactic that we're seeing with the ever widening concentric circles of targeting people in his system, in his hinterland. So they've targeted family members. Now, I'm very inspired by the bravery of Jimmy Lai, my client, of course, but I'm also very inspired by the bravery of another of my clients, Sebastian Lai, who you've all heard from today. Sebastian has been targeted and threatened simply for being a son speaking out for his father. It's very likely that in light of giving testimony today, we'll see abusive pieces in state media in the coming days. That's a pattern that we've seen when Sebastian addresses the United Nations. We see abusive pieces in state media calling him an enemy of the state, following threats, informal official statements to prosecute him. And we also get caught up in that as the lawyers.
Thank you.
So we've been threatened.
Thank you very much. We will do a lightning round of 3 minutes each. But before I do that, we need unanimous consent because the bells have been rung. So do I have unanimous consent from members to continue beyond 5:30? We'll do a lightning round of 3 members of 3 minutes each, starting with MP Ziad Abul Taif. You have 3 minutes, and let's stick to the time.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the witnesses. Michael, I have a question. You feel free not to answer. What does the daily routine of being at Chinese prison look like?
Thank you. Obviously, it's going to vary somewhat depending. My experience was in a detention center in Beijing. I don't guarantee it's the same for a Hong Kong prisoner, but you're woken at first of all, the lights are on constantly. They say this is a security measure, but clearly it also wears on you and you have a lack of sense of the time of day or in circadian rhythms. You're woken at about 6:30 a.m. by a bell. You have about half an hour to drink some water. There will be a roll call where you have to sit at attention on your bunk. And then the rest of the day is broken up into periods where you have to sit on the edge of your bunk, which is called Zoubar Xuexi. Essentially, you just are supposed to sit and reflect on your crimes or study if you happen to have the fortune of access to books, which is often not the case. And if one can ensure that prisoners have books and reading material, that is a very important way to alleviate their suffering, frankly. You will have 3 meals a day, but as the guards once told me, we make sure that you are able to eat enough. It's not our responsibility to make sure you eat well from a nutritional perspective. So the food usually is utterly devoid of protein and is mostly overcooked vegetables and rice or bread, and that's all. And that, especially over time, for a detainee like Jimmy Lai, can start to have grave health effects in terms of muscle loss and bone mineral density and other health effects like that. There is virtually no scope to do any real exercise. You're usually locked into an area. There is no gym or other facilities like that normally. You are often held in very close and utterly confined circumstances. And I need to underline that for a situation of someone like Jimmy, it is the isolation and the confinement that have an utterly devastating toll on both the psyche and on the nervous system and on the body. It is brutal punishment, frankly, and it is inhuman. And the solitary confinement in particular under the UN's Istanbul Protocol is unquestionably torture. So let us be very clear. As far as I'm concerned and serious psychologists are concerned, Jimmy Lai is being consistently tortured in this situation, and this is utterly unacceptable. The confinement of these imprisonments and the grinding routine and monotony all contributes to grinding you down, and that is exactly the purpose of it, unfortunately.
Obviously, the Chinese Communist Party, who runs China, do not, their human rights approach compared to ours is a wide gap, and they don't seem to admit to a mistake. How can we deal with such a scenario where we know, the arrogancy is at best now, and they're getting more powerful, and we're going to have multiple scenarios ahead of us similar to what happened to you and the other Michael, and now what's happened to Mr. Lai. So what's the best approach to deal with China?
Very, very brief response. We're already over time.
Take this on
multilateral. The United States, UK, friends and allies, we're in this world where allies and partners are not working well together. They need to come together. They need to come together, and they need to provide, for lack of a better word, a united front.
Thank you.
That is where we're most successful.
Thank you. We'll go next to Ms. Anita van den Belde. 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to something that you said, Mr. Kovrig, about flooding the channels, because we know that so often in these kinds of cases, it's sometimes hard to know public statements versus private conversations, how much pressure will actually work. In some countries, it works better than in others. So I wonder if you could elaborate, particularly, given your own personal experience, which I cannot even begin to fathom. The fact that you're here today trying to actually advocate for someone else in that situation says a tremendous amount about your character. And I think your insights would be very useful for the committee.
Let's be clear, it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution, and what may be the best solution in the case of one detainee or human rights situation and another is not always going to be the same. And here I would very much be wanting to consult with Mr. Lai's counsel and his family to determine what an appropriate strategy would be. The key, though, is to have a comprehensive and holistic advocacy and pressure strategy, along with, that clearly structures incentives, both negative and positive, and sees communication and publicity and media appearances and all of those interactions as part of a comprehensive strategy with clear goals. And so the publicity, whether it's public shaming or more positive statements in response, for example, to positive moves, needs to be coordinated. And it's not communication or media for its own sake. It's rather as part of a coordinated strategy together with legal measures and quiet diplomacy as well. They're complementary, and it's a question of timing and sequencing and the right tool at the right moment to maximize leverage and pressure. And as Mr. Stivers also said, done in a coordinated and multilateral way. And it's really that campaign approach to bring to bear that much force and influence and suasion that is the key to ultimate success. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Silver, I know that you said that Erwin Kotler is watching today, and I know that you've worked very closely with him over the years, and he has always been a firm believer that parliamentarians and the voice, particularly cross-party voice of parliamentarians, can be a very, very powerful tool. I wonder if you could comment on that and maybe give some examples.
Sure, and again, the UC motion was a prime example of that, but it shouldn't end there. All the tools that each and all of you have used individually and collectively amidst parliamentary procedure should be used to full effect in the case of Mr. Lai, whether that's SO31, speeches on the floor, whether that's statements on your social media under the Free Jimmy Lai hashtag, whether it's in your delegations to parliamentary assemblies of multilateral institutions. So I referenced, OSCE, Council of Europe, Francophonie, Commonwealth. I know that many of you are members of the parliamentary delegations to these groups and can shape resolutions, can have speeches on those floors. So just to make use of all those forums as you so effectively do already.
Thank you very much, Député Duceppe. Vous avez 3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci encore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks again to the witnesses. I think the quality of the evidence has been incredible. Ms. Gallagher, you're on Mr. Lai's crack legal team. I understand that doesn't necessarily mean consular services, but does it not send a powerful message, particularly at an event like a G7? Wouldn't that be helpful to highlight your role?
I can be very quick on this. In short, yes, very much so. And I think shining a light on this case, making clear that the international community is speaking with one voice, not only in calling for his release, but making clear what the plan is to secure his release and what the consequences will be if he's not released is critical.
Merci pour ça. Sébastien.
Thank you for that. Sebastian, you have the last word. The last few minutes are for you if you have anything to add, any message for the committee. Well, I just want to thank you and thank Canada for its commitment.
constant reminder every time that I speak to all of you that that my father does not fight alone, and I think I think he's honored to have all of you fighting for him, and I would just like to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I just say how incredibly grateful I am.
Merci. Merci à tous et toutes.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone for your work, both members of the committee, the chair, the clerk, the interpreters, everyone who's here today.
Much for your appearance and testimony in front of this committee. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, before we adjourn, just a housekeeping motion? Oh, not at the moment. Okay.
To that, yes. So thank you very much to all our witnesses, including those who are on video conference. Thank you for your testimony and your appearance on this important topic. Colleagues, there are 2 items to consider regarding the Subcommittee on International Human Rights. The clerk of our committee circulated yesterday a draft budget for the Subcommittee on International Human Rights, SDIR, totaling $48,250 relating to its study on the human rights situation in Sudan. Does the committee approve this budget? Yeah, I see approval. Also, the clerk shared earlier today a correspondence from the chair of SDIR regarding the adoption of the draft report entitled Enduring and Overcoming the Struggle of the Hazaras in Afghanistan. This report was previously adopted during the last parliament but did not have the chance to get the official response from the government. Therefore, SDIR wishes to adopt the report again in order to request a government response pursuant to Standing Order 109. So I turn to MP Vandenbeld, who has...
Yes, so moved.
Okay, wonderful.
Agreed.
Yes, wonderful. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting?
Yeah.
So we can...
Yes.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
So adjourned.